She found out the truth not from a private investigator, not from a suspicious text message, but from the sound of her own husband's laughter in a room where she was never supposed to exist. Vivian Caldwell had given this man 2 years of her life, her body, her silence, and her pride. She had swallowed every insult from his mother, buried every doubt beneath the weight of a sleeping baby on her chest. And tonight, standing outside a lounge hidden beneath a luxury hotel, watching Vincent Blackwell press his lips against another woman's hair, his wedding ring still catching the light, she finally understood. She had never been a wife. She had been a performance. If this story hits close to home, stay with me until the very end, and drop a like and comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The baby started crying at 2:47 in the morning. Vivian knew the time without checking her phone because she had memorized Lily's rhythms the way other women memorized their commutes, by feel, by dread, by the specific weight of exhaustion that came from never truly sleeping. She sat up in the dark, reached instinctively across the mattress, and found nothing but cool, undisturbed sheets. Vincent was not beside her. She told herself it meant nothing. He kept irregular hours. The business, what he called the business, never specifying, never explaining, operated at all hours and demanded his presence in ways that had long since stopped requiring her understanding. She had learned not to ask. Asking made his jaw tighten in a way that suggested the question itself was an offense. She got up, crossed the hallway barefoot, lifted Lily from the crib, and settled into the nursing chair in the corner of the nursery. The room smelled like baby powder and the faint chemical sweetness of the plug-in nightlight. Lily quieted almost immediately, her small fist closing around nothing, her breathing evening out with the specific stubbornness of someone determined to return to sleep as quickly as possible. Vivian envied her. Through the nursery window, she could see the east garden, lit at night by motion-sensitive floods that Vincent had installed for security reasons he never fully explained. The lights were on. She watched the pale wash of them across the boxwood hedges and tried to convince herself it was a deer that had tripped the sensor. The Blackwell estate sat on 11 acres outside the city. Deer were not uncommon, but she could hear voices. Not the words, just the cadence. 2 voices, low and deliberate, carrying through the double-paned glass in the particular way that sound travels in cold air. Flattened, stripped of detail, but unmistakably present. One was Vincent's, the other was Evelyn's, his mother, at this hour. Vivian laid Lily back in the crib and stood at the window long enough to watch the lights click off as the 2 figures moved away from the sensor's range, disappearing into the darker section of the garden nearest the rear gate. She stood there after they vanished. The garden sat empty and overlit, and somehow worse for it. Her phone buzzed on the nursing chair. Charlotte. The name on the screen made something in Vivian's chest relax slightly. Charlotte Reed had been her closest friend since their mid-20s, before Vincent, before the mansion, before Vivian had gradually stopped seeing most of the people who had known her when she was still just herself. Charlotte had never liked Vincent. She had said so once, plainly and without apology, and Vivian had almost let it end the friendship. She hadn't, and she was grateful for that now, in ways she couldn't fully articulate. She accepted the call before the second buzz. "It's almost 3 in the morning," Vivian said quietly. Not a complaint, just a statement of fact. Charlotte's voice came back tight and strange. "Leave the house. Right now. Don't wake Lily. Call Carmen to sit with her." A pause. "You need to see something." "Charlotte, I'm not asking Viv. I'm asking you to trust me for 20 minutes. That's it." Carmen was the night housekeeper, a quiet woman in her 50s who slept in the staff wing and who had, over the past year, become one of the few people in the Blackwell household who ever looked at Vivian with something resembling human warmth. She arrived at the nursery door within minutes of Vivian's knock, read something in Vivian's expression that asked no further questions, and settled into the nursing chair without a word. Vivian pulled on a coat over her pajamas, found her keys, and walked out through the side entrance that opened into the garage. She did not look back toward the garden. Charlotte texted her an address. A street in the financial district, a hotel Vivian recognized by name, one of the old money establishments that had been operating in the same building since before either of them was born. Discreet, the kind of place that did not post its events on any calendar accessible to the public. She drove for 22 minutes in near silence, the radio off, the heater filling the car with recycled warmth. She parked 2 blocks away because the valet stand made her nervous without knowing why. She walked the remaining distance with her coat pulled around her and her breath turning to vapor in the cold. Charlotte was waiting outside the hotel's side entrance, a service door that faced a narrow alley. She was wearing the same blazer she'd had on earlier that day, which meant she had not gone home. Her face, when she looked at Vivian, held the specific expression of someone delivering news they had been rehearsing and still could not find the right arrangement of words for. "Don't say anything until I show you," Charlotte said. "Just come inside." They went down a staircase behind a door that looked like a utility closet and opened instead into a corridor with polished floors and low lighting. At the far end was a lounge, the kind of private room that required either a membership or an introduction that was never written down anywhere. Charlotte led her to a position near the corridor's entrance, behind a partial wall of frosted glass that offered a fractured view of the room beyond. It took Vivian 3 seconds to find him. Vincent sat at a curved booth near the far wall, wearing a jacket she had helped him pick out on a trip they had taken together in the spring. He was leaning forward slightly, the way he leaned when he was talking and wanted to be understood. His right hand was wrapped around the upper arm of a woman seated beside him. Not possessively, but with the specific casualness of someone who had touched this person that way many times before and no longer thought about it. The woman was dark-haired, elegant, in the kind of way that suggested she had been taught how to sit rather than learning it naturally. A socialite's posture. A socialite's silence, watchful and controlled. On the table in front of Vincent, a low-ball glass, half empty. His hand, where it rested on her arm. And his wedding ring, catching the low light the same way it always did, the same way it had the morning Vivian slid it onto his finger. Charlotte's hand found Vivian's wrist in the dark. Vivian did not move. She was not sure she could. She watched Vincent say something to the woman. She could not hear it across the distance and the low music filling the room. The woman tilted her head slightly and smiled in the way people smile when they are not amused but are choosing to be gracious. Then Vincent's free hand came up and brushed a strand of hair from the woman's shoulder with a familiarity that required no explanation. "How long?" Vivian said. It was not a question. It came out flat and quiet, the way air sounds when it leaves a room that has lost pressure. "I found out 3 days ago," Charlotte said. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. I didn't want to do it wrong." "How long has this been happening?" Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "From what I can piece together, months, maybe longer." Vivian kept watching. She was conscious of her own breathing, the way it was moving in and out of her at a strange mechanical cadence, like she had forgotten how to do it automatically and was now doing it on purpose. She was also conscious of her hands. They were completely still. She had expected them to shake. "Her name is Isabel Monroe," Charlotte said. "She runs in the same circles. Some of the families Vincent does business with, she's connected to those networks. It's not a random woman, Viv. She's embedded in his world." Which meant Vivian had been the variable, the isolated one. The woman kept separate from the world her husband actually inhabited, fed just enough information to believe she understood what she was part of, while the real machinery operated around her without her knowledge. She thought about the garden, Evelyn's voice in the dark, the way the lights had clicked off as the two of them moved deliberately away from the window line. "She knows," Vivian said. "What?" "Evelyn, she knows about this." She turned away from the frosted glass finally, pulling her gaze from the booth, where her husband sat with his hand on another woman. "She's known. That's why she's always—" She stopped, pressed her fingers briefly to her sternum, exhaled. "She never thought I was good enough for the family, and the whole time she knew there was already someone else." Charlotte didn't answer. The silence was its own answer. They left the way they came. Back through the corridor, up the service stairs, into the alley where the cold hit them both like a physical thing. Vivian stood still for a moment on the sidewalk. A cab moved past on the street ahead. Someone's music leaked from an upper window. The city continued its ordinary nocturnal business, as though nothing had just been dismantled. "Where do you want to go?" Charlotte asked. "I don't know." A pause. "Not back there. Not yet." Charlotte drove. Vivian sat in the passenger seat and watched the city give way to the expressway, and the expressway give way to the lakeside road that ran north along the water. They ended up at a turnout she and Charlotte had used in their early 20s, a gravel patch facing a stretch of private lake that technically belonged to a property association but had never been enforced. They sat on the hood of Charlotte's car with the water in front of them, dark and flat and cold-looking, and Vivian finally cried. Not with the theatrical fullness of someone performing grief, but with the ugly, effortful sound of someone who had been holding something too heavy for too long and had finally simply dropped it. Charlotte did not try to fix it. She sat with one hand resting near Vivian's on the cold metal of the hood and let it happen. When it was done, Vivian wiped her face with the back of her hand and stared at the water. "Was it something I did wrong?" she said. She heard the question and hated it immediately, hated herself for asking it, but the asking was involuntary. It was already out. "Don't do that," Charlotte said. "Was it... When Lily was born, things changed. I know I was exhausted. I know I wasn't... Viv, stop. I need to understand why. Because he's selfish and he's reckless, and he got away with things his entire life because of who his family is." Charlotte's voice was not soft. It was precise. "You gave that man your loyalty and your body, and you raised his daughter in a house where his own mother treated you like staff. That's what you gave him. Whatever he decided to do with another woman, that's on him. Don't you make it about your worth." Vivian did not respond immediately. She looked at the water. She thought about the way Vincent had said her name in the early years. The particular weight he gave it, like it belonged to him, like he was the one who had given it meaning. She had believed that. She had believed it for a long time. "I have to go back," she said finally. "Viv, I have a daughter in that house. I'm not leaving my daughter." She slid off the hood of the car. Her bare feet found the cold gravel through the thin soles of the flats she'd pulled on in the garage. "I just need to think. I have to think clearly before I do anything." They drove back toward the estate in silence. Charlotte stopped at the gate, and Vivian walked the remaining distance up the drive, not because it was far, but because she needed the time. The security lights clicked on as she moved through them. The house was dark. The garden was empty. She entered through the side door, moved through the kitchen, climbed the stairs. She checked the nursery first. Lily was still asleep. Carmen looked up from the chair and Vivian nodded, and the older woman left without speaking. Vivian stood over the crib for a while, her daughter's face in the faint light, the way Lily always slept with one fist pressed to her cheek, as though preparing for something even in sleep, made something in Vivian tighten and clarify simultaneously. The grief was real. The grief was going to be with her for a while, but it was not going to run this. She was going to need to be very careful, very deliberate. She could not walk back down those stairs and confront Vincent tonight. Not here, not without knowing exactly how far this went, not without understanding what she was standing on before she decided what to move. The Blackwell name meant something in this city. His resources were not hers. His lawyers were not hers. She had spent 2 years inside this house without building a single wall that belonged to her. That was going to have to change. She went to the bedroom. Vincent had returned while she was gone. She could see the shape of him under the covers, hear the slow evenness of his breathing that meant he was already asleep, or performing sleep well enough that the difference was irrelevant. She sat on the edge of the bed in her coat for a long moment. Her wedding ring was on her hand. She looked at it. She thought about his ring on his hand in that booth, how it had caught the light. She did not take hers off. Not yet. Not tonight. Tonight she needed to look like nothing had changed. In the morning, she told herself, she would begin. The morning arrived the way mornings do after sleepless nights, thin and gray and merciless. Vivian heard Lily stir at 6 and rose before the monitor could sound. She fed her, changed her, carried her downstairs to the kitchen and made coffee, and sat at the island with Lily on her lap, and the sun beginning to work its way across the tile floor. Evelyn Blackwell descended the main staircase at 7:15 exactly. She had done this every morning since Vivian had moved into the estate. The same time, the same route, the same expression on her face that suggested the household had already committed several failures before she had reached the bottom step. She wore a silk dressing gown and carried herself with the particular rigidity of a woman who had never once considered that her presence might not be the most important thing in a room. "The coffee is too strong," Evelyn said, not as a complaint, more as a pronouncement, before she had even reached the island. Vivian looked at her. really looked at her. The thin pressed mouth, the deliberate coolness of the woman's eyes when they moved over her granddaughter, without the warmth that should have come automatically. The way Evelyn had always held herself slightly apart from Vivian, as though proximity itself was a concession she resented making. "There's more in the pot," Vivian said. "You can add water if you'd like." Evelyn paused. It was a fraction of a second pause, but it was there. "I beg your pardon?" "The hot water is in the kettle. If you want it weaker, that's an easy fix." Vivian looked back down at Lily, who was working at the ear of a stuffed rabbit with the focused seriousness she brought to most physical tasks. "Help yourself." The kitchen was very quiet. Evelyn stood at the counter for a moment that went on slightly too long to be natural. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back the way she had come. Vivian breathed. She had said nothing extraordinary. She had said nothing cruel. She had simply declined to apologize for coffee that did not require an apology. And yet her pulse was running fast, and her palms had dampened, and the small victory of it sat in her chest like something sharp and surprising. She was still sitting there, still turning it over, when she heard Vincent's footsteps on the stairs. He came into the kitchen in a dark shirt and suit trousers, phone already in his hand, wearing the face he wore when his mind was already 3 places ahead of his body. He kissed the top of Lily's head automatically without really seeing her. He reached past Vivian for the coffee without acknowledging her. He was about to move to the far end of the island when Vivian spoke. "We need to talk tonight," she said. "When you get home." He stopped. The phone went still in his hand. "About what?" "Tonight," she said. "When you're home." He looked at her for a moment, really looked, which was unusual enough by itself to register. Something moved across his face that she couldn't quite name. Not guilt. Not yet. Something more like the particular alertness of a careful man who has noticed that something in his environment has shifted position. "Fine," he said. "Tonight." He left. Vivian listened to the sound of his car pulling down the drive, the gate mechanism engaging, the estate going quiet again. Then she took her phone from her pocket and opened the contact list. She found the name she was looking for near the bottom. A lawyer Charlotte had mentioned once, a woman who specialized in matrimonial cases involving complex assets, who had a reputation for being thorough in ways that powerful men tended to find inconvenient. She stared at the number for a long time. Then she put the phone away. Not yet. She needed more first. She needed to know exactly what she was dealing with before she made a single move that couldn't be undone. Because the Mafia boss who slept in her bed had resources she hadn't even begun to map, and if she was going to step out from under the shadow of the Blackwell name, she was going to do it once, completely, and in a way that left her standing. What Vivian did not know, what she would not know until it was nearly too late, was that the most devastating blow had not yet landed. Because while she was sitting at that kitchen island calculating her first careful moves, Isabel Monroe was sitting in a private clinic across the city, holding a piece of paper that was about to change every equation Vivian had started building. The lawyer's name was Diana Mercer, and she had an office on the 14th floor of a building in the financial district that looked, from the outside, like every other building on that block. Glass and steel and the kind of architectural restraint that communicated seriousness without needing to announce it. Vivian had made the appointment under her maiden name, Caldwell, because something instinctive told her not to use Blackwell anywhere she didn't have to. She sat across from Diana Mercer 2 days after the night at the hotel lounge, with Lily at the estate under Carmen's watch, and a story prepared for Vincent about a dentist appointment. The lie had come easily. That bothered her more than she expected it to. Diana Mercer was in her late 40s, with the kind of face that had learned early to give very little away. She listened without interrupting while Vivian laid out the basic architecture of the situation, the affair, the length of the marriage, the assets she was aware of, the ones she suspected existed but couldn't name. When Vivian finished, Diana set down her pen and looked at her directly. "When you say connected to criminal organizations," Diana said carefully, "are we talking about associations? Or are we talking about operations?" "Operations," Vivian said. "I've never had documentation. I've never had specifics. But I know what his business is, and it isn't what he tells people it is." That complicates the asset picture significantly. "I know. It also means that if you move prematurely, before you have a clear accounting of what's actually there, you risk him restructuring everything before any legal proceeding can reach it." Diana picked up her pen again. Mrs. Caldwell, how much access do you currently have to household accounts? Enough to manage the estate's day-to-day? Not enough to see anything beyond that. Does he know you've come here? No. Keep it that way. Diana leaned forward slightly. I want you to start documenting everything you can access without raising suspicion. Bank statements, correspondence, anything with his name on it that passes through the household. Don't take originals. Photograph them. Keep copies somewhere he can't reach. A pause. And don't confront him. Not yet. Not until we know the full shape of what we're dealing with. Vivian nodded. Her hands were in her lap, and she was gripping one thumb with the opposite hand hard enough that the skin had gone white. She made herself release it. How long does something like this take? She asked. Depends on how much he's hidden and how well. Diana's voice was not unkind, but it was precise in a way that left no room for comfort. These men like your husband, they spend years building structures designed specifically to be invisible in legal proceedings. You're not just divorcing a person, you're trying to dismantle an architecture. Vivian drove home in the gray afternoon light and sat in the car in the estate's rear parking structure for 4 minutes before she was ready to go inside. She counted them. 4 minutes of sitting with her hands on the steering wheel and the engine cooling around her and the particular quality of silence that exists inside a closed car. Enclosed, conditional, belonging to no one. Then she went in. Vincent came home that evening at a time that suggested he had made a deliberate effort to arrive when he said he would. He set his keys on the hall table in the entrance, shrugged off his jacket, and found Vivian in the sitting room off the kitchen where she had positioned herself with a glass of water and the appearance of someone who had been waiting calmly. She had rehearsed this. Not the words specifically, but the temperature of them. She needed to be controlled. She needed to seem like a woman who was hurt, but who was extending a hand. She needed him to believe for now that she was still reachable. You're having an affair, she said. No preamble, no softening, just the sentence, placed in front of him the way you place an object on a table when you're done carrying it. The silence that followed was 3 seconds long. She counted those, too. Then Vincent closed his eyes briefly, not with the guilt of a man caught, but with the particular exhaustion of a man who had been anticipating an impact and was recalibrating now that it had arrived. He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her. He did not try to deny it immediately. That itself told her something. Who told you? He said. Does that matter? It matters to me. Then we're already talking about different things. She kept her voice level. I want to know how long, and I want you to tell me the truth because I will find out regardless, and I would rather hear it from you. He looked at the floor for a moment. When he looked back up, his face had settled into something that was not quite an expression, a careful blankness she recognized as the face he wore when he was working out a problem in real time. 4 months, he said. She had prepared herself for a number. The number still landed somewhere in her chest like a stone dropped into standing water, the ripple moving outward before she could stop it. 4 months. Lily had been 3 months old when it started. She had been at home, recovering, sleep-deprived and hormonally wrecked, and trying to remember what she was supposed to feel like. And Vincent had been 4 months deep into another woman. Is it over? She said. He hesitated, just a fraction, but she saw it. Yes, he said. The hesitation was still there, hanging in the air between them, more honest than the word that had followed it. Vivian looked at her husband. This man she had loved with the full, unguarded weight of everything she had at the time. This man who wore the most expensive suits she had ever touched, and who had once held her face in both hands like it was something worth keeping. And she felt the particular grief of seeing someone clearly for the first time. Because of Lily, she said finally, I'm willing to try to get through this. But I need you to understand that things are going to be different. And this was the gamble. Not the confrontation itself, but the appearance of being willing to remain. Because Diana Mercer had been right. She could not tip her hand. Not yet. She needed access to information she didn't currently have, and the only way to get it was to be inside this house, inside this life, close enough to see what Vincent moved in the dark. He came across the room and sat beside her and took her hand in both of his and said things. Apologies, promises, the usual architecture of a man trying to reconstruct what he had broken. She listened. She nodded in the right places. She let him hold her hand. She thought about Diana Mercer's office, the 14th floor, the pale afternoon light through the window. She thought, I only need a little more time. The weeks that followed were strange in the particular way that deliberate performances are strange, exhausting beneath the surface while appearing functional from the outside. Vincent made visible efforts. He came home earlier. He sat with Lily in the evenings and held her with more attentiveness than Vivian had seen from him in months. He deflected Evelyn's more pointed criticisms in Vivian's presence, something he had never done before. Vivian watched all of it with two sets of eyes simultaneously. One set was the eyes of a woman who wanted to believe it. Those eyes were real. She had not stopped loving him cleanly, had not managed to remove the feeling from her chest the way you remove a splinter. The other set was colder and more practical. Those eyes were documenting. She found the first hidden account almost by accident. She had been looking through the household's filing cabinet for the insurance documentation on the estate when she came across a folder that contained a single account statement. Not from any bank she recognized, routed through a holding company with a name that meant nothing to her. The statement showed a balance that was significantly larger than anything Vincent had ever described their assets as containing. She photographed every page with her phone, closed the folder, replaced it in exactly the position she had found it, and went to make Lily's lunch with her heart running at a speed that she had to actively manage for the next 2 hours. She found 3 more accounts over the following weeks, not by going looking for them in ways that would create a trail, but by paying attention to the papers that came through the household, to the names on correspondence she was never meant to read, to the numbers that appeared in phone conversations she was not supposed to overhear. Vincent was not sloppy, but he had grown comfortable. He had lived for 2 years inside this house with a woman he believed he had successfully contained, and comfort had made him less careful than he would otherwise have been. She sent everything to Diana Mercer through an encrypted file-sharing application Diana's office had set up for exactly this purpose. She never mentioned it to Charlotte. She mentioned it to no one. Through all of this, Evelyn remained the constant abrasion. The older woman had registered the shift in Vivian's behavior. The morning with the coffee had not been forgotten, and Evelyn was not a woman who forgot small defiances. She did not escalate immediately. Instead, she shifted tactics in the subtle way of someone who had long experience engineering the outcomes she wanted without appearing to engineer anything. She began spending more time in the communal rooms of the estate, her presence a steady pressure. She made observations about the house, about Lily, about the way Vivian managed her time. In the particular register that sits below criticism but above neutrality, the register that requires no response because it was never technically a statement. One afternoon in the 3rd week, Vivian was in the kitchen with Lily when Evelyn entered and began a conversation about the estate's upcoming charitable event, an annual function the Blackwell family hosted that Vivian had been managing the planning for since the previous year. It was a substantial undertaking, and Vivian had been managing it competently, which Evelyn had never acknowledged. I've been thinking, Evelyn said, examining the list of vendors Vivian had assembled, that we should have Miriam handle the event this year. Miriam was the estate's social director, a woman Evelyn had hired before Vivian entered the picture, and who reported in all practical terms to Evelyn rather than to any nominal chain of authority. I've been planning this for 3 months, Vivian said. Yes, and it's a great deal to manage with a young child. Evelyn set the vendor list down. It's not a criticism, it's practical. It's not too much for me to manage. Vivian? The way Evelyn said her name, just slightly weighted, just slightly patient, as though speaking to someone who kept almost getting it right, had always made Vivian want to either leave the room or drive her fist through something solid. This event reflects on the family. I'm sure you understand that. Lily was in the bouncer seat on the kitchen floor, watching both of them with the solemn attention of a baby who had not yet learned to pretend she wasn't listening. Vivian looked at Evelyn. She thought about the garden at 3 a.m, the lights clicking off as they moved away from the window line. The event is mine, Vivian said. I'll manage it. I've already spoken with Miriam. Then you'll need to unspeak with her. Vivian picked up the vendor list and tucked it into the folder she'd brought downstairs. The event is mine. I'm going to go put Lily down for her nap. She picked up her daughter and left the kitchen. She made it to the top of the stairs before her legs began to register what the rest of her had been feeling. The deep cellular trembling that follows sustained adrenaline, the body catching up to what the mind managed to suppress in real time. She sat on the floor of the upstairs hallway with Lily in her lap, and her back against the wall, and breathed until it passed. Lily looked at her face with the wide, uncritical attention of a baby examining something interesting and not yet sure what to name it. "I know," Vivian said to her quietly. "I know." She was in the estate's small home office, a room Vincent used infrequently enough that she had come to use it herself during Lily's nap times, when she found the email chain. She had not been looking for it specifically. She had been searching the shared household server for a catering invoice she needed for the event, and the search function had returned several results, one of which was a chain of messages from an address she didn't recognize, sent to Vincent's personal estate account. The subject line contained the name of the charitable event, which was why it had been returned by her search. She opened it. The email chain was 9 messages long. It was between Vincent and a contact identified only by initials, RV. And it was not about the charitable event at all. The event was mentioned only in passing, as a date landmark. The rest of the messages discussed a financial arrangement involving the transfer of assets through a series of holding entities in a way that would make tracing the origin legally difficult. The arrangement appeared to involve an anticipated inheritance. The messages didn't name the source directly, but the references were consistent enough that Vivian understood what she was reading. Her parents had sold the family land in the spring. She had told Vincent about the proceeds casually in conversation without thinking about it. The sale had been finalized recently, and the inheritance transfer was pending. A substantial sum held in her parents' estate planning trust with Vivian named as primary beneficiary. RV's final message to Vincent, sent 2 weeks ago, contained 3 sentences. "The timing works. Keep her in place through the transfer date. After that, your options open up." Vivian read those 3 sentences 4 times. Then she photographed the screen with her phone, closed the email, restored the inbox to the exact view it had been in before she opened it, and sat for a moment in the chair. Keep her in place. She thought about the apologies, the evenings home early, Vincent with Lily on his knee, the protection from Evelyn, all of it, every careful performed gesture of the last 3 weeks, assembled itself in her mind into a different shape than the one she had been choosing to see. He was not trying to save the marriage. He was stalling it. She was a position to be maintained until a financial transaction cleared. After that, the email said, his options opened up. She did not need to translate that. She put her phone in her pocket and walked to the window that faced the rear garden, the boxwood hedges, the motion-sensitive lights, the gate he and Evelyn had moved toward in the dark, away from the window line, speaking in voices too quiet to carry. She had told herself she needed a little more time. What she understood now, looking at the hedge line in the afternoon light with her daughter asleep down the hall, was that time was exactly what she didn't have. The transfer date, the date by which her parents' inheritance would move into her accounts, was 6 weeks away. Vincent was holding the marriage together until that date with the same deliberate patience he applied to every business arrangement he needed to see through to completion. 6 weeks. And then, in his words, his options opened up. She reached for her phone to call Diana Mercer, and then stopped herself. Not the phone in this room. Not on this network. She went upstairs, checked on Lily, still asleep, one fist pressed to her cheek as always, then went to the bathroom adjoining the master bedroom, ran the tap to cover the sound, and called Diana from the bathroom floor with the water running and her back against the tub. Diana answered on the second ring. "I found something," Vivian said, "and I think we need to move faster than we thought." She described the email chain. Diana listened without interrupting. When Vivian finished, the silence on the other end was brief and professional. "Don't touch the inheritance accounts," Diana said. "Don't move anything. Don't let your parents move anything either, not without talking to me first. He doesn't know I've seen it. Keep it that way. I mean that literally. Every interaction with him from this point, you are managing an impression. You need to appear exactly as you appeared yesterday and the day before." A pause. "I'm going to need to move some things on my end. Can you come in next week?" "Yes." "Good." Another pause, and when Diana spoke again, there was something in her voice that had shifted slightly. Not urgency exactly, but a heightening of attention. "Vivian, how confident are you that you're not being monitored in the house? Phones, email, the network?" The question sat in the steam of the running bathroom tap and in the particular cold, Vivian suddenly felt despite the warmth in the room. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Then we're going to assume that you are," Diana said. "Which means everything from here goes through the backup phone I'm going to have delivered to your friend Charlotte. Nothing through the household network, nothing through your primary number." A pause. This just became a different kind of case. Vivian sat on the bathroom floor for a moment after the call ended, the phone in her lap, the tap still running. She looked at the tile in front of her. White marble, expensive, chosen by Evelyn, everything in this house chosen by someone other than Vivian. She was sitting in a house that had never belonged to her, married to a man who was maintaining their marriage the way you maintain a position in a negotiation, inside an estate that was owned and shaped and controlled by a woman who had never thought Vivian was anything but a temporary inconvenience. And somewhere across the city, Isabel Monroe was sitting in a private clinic with a piece of paper. Vivian did not know about that yet. But the next afternoon she would see them together by accident. Vincent's car in front of a building she didn't recognize. And through the glass lobby, Vincent with his hand on Isabel's arm the same way he'd had it at the hotel lounge. And this time, Isabel would be holding something against her chest. And when she turned toward the lobby doors and the light caught her profile directly, Vivian would understand. With the specific cold clarity of a person receiving information, their body registers before their mind has fully formed, though. Isabel Monroe was pregnant. Vivian had known it before she finished processing the image. The way Isabel stood, the particular angle of her body away from the cold lobby glass, the thing she was pressing to her chest that resolved itself, as Vivian's eyes adjusted, into a manila envelope the size of a medical folder. The profile was unmistakable. Vivian had seen that specific silhouette before, had worn it herself, knew exactly what it meant in the body of a woman who was otherwise slim and composed and dressed with the careful intentionality of someone who controlled every variable of how she was perceived. She was maybe 4 months along, maybe 5, which meant it had started before Vincent came home and apologized, before the careful evenings and the attentive gestures and the hand held in the sitting room, before he sat across from her and said the word yes with a hesitation built into it that she had already registered and chosen to set aside. Vivian was parked half a block away in a car she had borrowed from Charlotte that morning, under the pretense of a routine errand, her own vehicle too recognizable, something in her having already understood without fully articulating it, that she needed to move around the city in ways that left a smaller footprint. She watched through the lobby glass as Vincent put his hand on Isabel's lower back. Not the arm this time, the lower back, the specific geography of that gesture landing somewhere in Vivian's sternum, with the precision of something aimed, and guided her toward the building's interior corridor and out of view. She sat in Charlotte's car for 11 minutes. She knew because she watched the clock on the dashboard without meaning to, counting the minutes. The way you count things when your mind needs something mechanical to hold on to while everything else is moving too fast to track. Then she drove back to the estate. She did not call Diana, not yet. She needed to be somewhere solid first, somewhere she could breathe without managing the sound of it. Carmen was in the garden with Lily when Vivian pulled in, the two of them on the blanket near the topiary where the afternoon light still reached. Lily was doing the thing she had recently discovered, sitting upright with enormous concentration and then slowly toppling sideways as though the effort of remaining vertical was a negotiation she hadn't fully committed to. Under any other circumstances, Vivian would have laughed. She lifted one hand toward Carmen in acknowledgement and went inside. She went directly to the home office, closed the door, and sat at the desk without turning on the lamp. The room held afternoon light from the west-facing window, orange and flat, the specific quality of light that makes everything look like it's already a memory. A boy. Evelyn had made the preference known from before Lily was born, had made it known in the particular way powerful women make preferences. Known when they have learned that stating things directly creates resistance they prefer to avoid. Comments about legacy, about the importance of the family name continuing, about what the organization required from the next generation of Blackwells. Vivian had absorbed every one of those comments with the careful neutrality of a woman trying to love a family that had not chosen to love her back. And when Lily arrived, perfect and furious and entirely herself, Vivian had watched Evelyn's face in the delivery suite and understood that her daughter had already been categorized as a disappointment before she had taken her first breath. Isabel Monroe was carrying a boy, She did not know this with absolute certainty, but the weight of the circumstantial evidence arranged itself in her mind with the cold logic of things that are true before they are proven. Isabel was connected to the network. Isabel was not someone Vincent had stumbled into by accident. She was positioned, embedded, the product of an introduction that had almost certainly been deliberate. And Evelyn, who had been navigating the social architecture of this world for 40 years, would not have allowed a random affair to persist for months inside her son's marriage unless it served a purpose she had already identified. She was still sitting in the dark office when she heard the front door. Vincent, earlier than usual, the sound of his footsteps in the entrance hall, the particular weight of them, the slight pause near the hall table where he always set his keys. Vivian had lived in this house long enough to know the acoustic map of it precisely, which floorboards registered which footfalls, where the sound traveled and where it was absorbed. She heard him speak to someone, a woman's voice answering. Not Carmen. Carmen was still outside with Lily. Evelyn. Vivian stood and moved to the office door, opening it 1 inch. The voices were coming from the entrance hall, low, not quite at the level of privacy, but not at normal conversational volume either. The level of people who have remembered, after beginning to speak freely, that they are not alone in the building. She could make out fragments. Her own name, a date, the word transfer. Then Evelyn's voice, more controlled than Vincent's, saying something Vivian couldn't parse. And then Vincent's response, which was just 2 words, and which she heard clearly because his voice carried differently than Evelyn's, and because he said it with the specific flatness of a man confirming something he had already decided. She'll stay. Vivian closed the office door quietly. She stood with her back against it in the dark room, one hand flat against the wood behind her, and worked on breathing at a rate that would not give her away through the sound of it. Outside, the voices moved toward the back of the house. The dining room, probably. Far enough. She'll stay. Not she wants to stay. Not she's agreed to stay. She'll stay. As though it were a logistical fact about an object that was being kept in a particular location for a particular period of time. The language of a man discussing an asset management strategy, not a marriage. The backup phone that Diana's office had delivered to Charlotte was in Vivian's coat pocket. She had been carrying it since Charlotte handed it to her 2 days earlier. She took it out now and stood in the darkening office and dialed. Diana answered on the first ring this time. "He has a child coming," Vivian said, "with the other woman. I think it's a boy." Silence. Then, "Are you certain?" "Certain enough. That changes the inheritance calculus significantly. If he establishes paternity on a male child, his mother's influence over the estate planning..." Diana stopped herself. "How are you holding up?" "I need you to tell me what this does to our timeline." A pause. "It accelerates everything. If he has a male heir coming, the incentive to remove you from the picture before the inheritance transfers goes up substantially. He won't want to split anything. And Evelyn's been part of this from the beginning," Vivian said. "I heard them just now. They're coordinating." "Vivian," Diana's voice had gone to its most precise register. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not confront either of them. I know that every part of you wants to. Don't. We are 4 weeks out from having enough documentation to walk into a courtroom and make a case that survives. 4 weeks. Can you hold that for 4 weeks?" Vivian looked at the orange light through the window. The garden below it, Lily still on the blanket, Carmen sitting cross-legged nearby, her daughter's small hands reaching for something in the grass. "Yes," she said. She held it for 11 days. On the 12th day, the thing she had been most carefully trying to prevent happened anyway. Not through any failure of her own management, but because Charlotte's encrypted file storage had a vulnerability that neither Charlotte nor Vivian nor Diana's office had identified, and someone with access to competent technical resources had been looking. Vivian discovered this when she arrived at Diana Mercer's office for their weekly meeting and found Diana standing at the window with a particular quality of stillness that preceded difficult information. Diana turned when Vivian entered and said, without preamble, "He knows you've been collecting documentation." Vivian sat down without being asked. "When?" she said. "I'm not certain. My best estimate is within the past 72 hours. Diana came away from the window. Someone accessed the secure file repository. They didn't take anything, or rather, if they did, I can't confirm what was extracted, but the access log shows an entry point that wasn't any of ours. Does he know about you? I don't know, but we have to assume he might. Diana sat across from her. This changes our approach. We can't wait 4 weeks. Vivian's hands were in her lap. She looked at them. What does faster look like? It looks like we file for divorce and protective orders simultaneously, inside the next week. And we do it in a courthouse where his reach is limited. We have enough. It's not everything I wanted, but it's enough to initiate proceedings and get Lily placed under legal protection before he can maneuver. Diana held her gaze. It also means that when you go home today, you need to behave exactly as you have been behaving. Nothing can indicate that you know he knows. Because if he understands that you're aware the timeline has accelerated, he will move first, and he will move fast. Vivian drove home with both hands on the wheel and her mind running at a speed that made the 40-minute drive feel like something she was moving through underwater. She had spent 2 weeks performing normalcy, smiling at the right times, managing Lily's schedule with the appearance of a woman whose primary concern was her daughter's nap routine, enduring Evelyn's presence at the dinner table with the neutrality of someone who had not yet decided to detonate anything. She had believed she was choosing the moment. She had not understood that the moment was also being chosen around her. She pulled into the estate. The gate opened. She drove up the lane. The house looked the same. It always looked the same from the outside, grand and contained and sealed against the specific kind of damage that was currently eating it from the interior. She went inside. Vincent was in the sitting room, which was unusual for late afternoon on a weekday. He was in the chair that faced the door, also unusual. He had a glass in his hand, but he wasn't drinking from it. He was watching the entrance. He had been waiting for her. Vivian registered all of this in the 2 seconds it took her to cross the threshold and close the front door. She hung her coat on the hook by the door. The same hook, the same motion, same as every other afternoon. She set her bag on the hall table. "How was your appointment?" he said. "Routine," she said. She walked into the sitting room and moved toward the kitchen without pausing. "Do you want coffee?" "Sit down, Vivian." She turned. He was still in the chair, still watching her. The glass was on the side table now. His hands were folded in his lap with the specific controlled stillness of a man who is managing something under the surface. "I have to start Lily's dinner," she said. "Carmen will do it. Sit down." She sat on the couch across from him. She crossed her ankles and kept her hands loose in her lap and looked at him with the face she had been practicing for 12 days. Attentive and slightly puzzled, the face of a woman who had no idea what was coming. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to think about your answer before you give it." "Okay. Have you been speaking to a lawyer?" The question arrived without any elevation of his voice, any shift in his posture. It landed like a flat object, not thrown but placed. "What kind of lawyer?" Vivian said. "The kind a wife talks to when she's planning something." "I don't know what you mean, Vincent." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds, and held it toward her. She leaned forward and took it. She unfolded it. It was a printout, a screenshot, actually, of the encrypted file repository, the access log. Her login, time-stamped. The folder names she had created to organize the photographed documents. Everything visible in a single image. She looked at it for what she calculated was the right amount of time. Then she looked up at him. She did not perform shock. That would have been wrong. Vincent was too careful, too experienced at reading performance to believe shock from someone he had already identified as having been deliberate. Instead, she looked at him with the specific directness of a woman who has been caught and is deciding in real time what to do about it. "How long have you been watching my activity on the network?" she said. "Long enough." He leaned forward in the chair. His voice was still controlled, but there was something underneath it now. Not quite anger, something tighter than anger, the specific tension of a man who has confirmed what he suspected and is now recalibrating the extent of the damage. "What were you planning to do with it?" "Protect myself." "From what?" "From you." She held his gaze. "From the plan you've been running since you came home and apologized. The one where you keep me here until my parents' inheritance transfers, and then you move on to whatever comes next." She set the printout on the cushion beside her. "I found the email chain, Vincent. RV. Keep her in place through the transfer date. After that, your options open up. She watched his jaw tighten. I've known for almost 3 weeks. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. She could feel the pressure of it against her eardrums. You've been performing, he said. His voice had gone flat in a way she had only heard a few times before, a register he used when the social surface of a situation had been removed and he was operating without it. This entire time. So were you. He stood up. Not quickly, deliberately, the movement of a man exercising control over his own body in a moment when less disciplined versions of himself might not. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to her, looking at the garden. Where are the copies? He said. Somewhere you won't find them. He turned. His face had resolved itself into something she didn't have a name for yet. Not the face of her husband, not the face of the man who had held her daughter on his knee with manufactured tenderness. Something older than both of those faces. Something that had been underneath them all along. You don't understand what you're doing, he said. I understand exactly what I'm doing. No. He crossed the room in 3 steps and crouched in front of her, his forearms on his knees, putting his face at her level in the way that was meant to feel like intimacy, but operated as confinement. You've collected some documents. You've talked to a lawyer, and you think that means you have leverage over the Blackwell family. He held her gaze. Vivian, I am trying to give you an opportunity to step back from something that is going to hurt you very badly. She looked at him from a distance of 14 inches. She could see the specific shade of his eyes, could remember when she had loved the color of them. She thought about Isabel Monroe in the clinic lobby, the manila envelope, the profile that told its own story. Is she having a boy? Vivian said. The question hit him somewhere she could see. Not in the face, his face held, but in the hands, a single involuntary tension in the fingers that lasted less than a second before he controlled it. He didn't answer. Your mother knew before I did, Vivian said. That's what the garden was about, the night I heard you both. She already knew, and she was already planning, and everything that came after, the apology, the effort, the protection from her. That was a coordinated performance, wasn't it? The two of you, together. Vincent stood up and walked back to the window. Get a different lawyer, he said, one who understands the situation. Sign what I send you, take what I offer, and leave the estate with something. A pause. Or don't, and find out what happens when someone who doesn't understand this world tries to fight it using the world's own tools. He left the room. She sat on the couch for a long time after his footsteps faded. The printout was beside her. The room had gone gray with early evening. She could hear from somewhere upstairs the sound of Lily beginning to wake from her nap. The specific pattern of sounds that preceded full wakefulness. A kind of conversational murmuring that Lily conducted with the air above her crib. She sat. She picked up the backup phone. She called Diana. He knows everything, she said when Diana answered. The documentation, the lawyer, the timeline. He knows I've been collecting. He confronted me tonight. Diana was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. What did he say? He told me to get a different lawyer and sign whatever he sends me. A pause. Diana, can we file tomorrow? I need to make some calls tonight. I can have the paperwork ready by morning. But Vivian, if we file tomorrow, you need to understand that everything accelerates from that point. He will respond, and his response will not be slow and it will not be gentle. You need to be ready to leave the estate the same day we file. You and Lily, together, to a location he doesn't know about. I know. Do you have somewhere? I will by morning. She ended the call. She put the phone in her pocket. She climbed the stairs and went to Lily's room and picked her daughter up from the crib and held her in the gray evening light coming through the nursery window, her cheek against Lily's head, and stood there for a while without moving. This was the last night she would put her daughter to bed in this house. She was certain of that. Whatever came next, the filing, Vincent's response, the collision of everything she had built and everything she was dismantling. It was beginning tomorrow, and there was no version of tomorrow that looked like today. She did not know, standing in that nursery in the last quiet hour before everything broke open, that Diana Mercer's office would receive a registered legal notice at 7 the following morning, not from Vincent's attorneys, but from a firm she had never heard of, representing a party she had never considered, filing a claim that reframed the entire inheritance question in a way that neither she nor Diana had. The legal notice arrived at Diana Mercer's office at 7:14 in the morning, and Diana called Vivian on the backup phone at 7:17. Vivian was already awake. She had not slept in any meaningful sense. She had been in the bed, in the dark, monitoring the particular quality of silence in the house the way an animal monitors the perimeter of a space it is no longer certain is safe. She answered before the second pulse of vibration. "Tell me," she said. "There's a claim filed against your parents' inheritance trust." Diana's voice was at its most precise. The register that meant the information was serious enough that emotion had been set entirely aside to make room for it. "Filed yesterday afternoon, which means it was prepared before Vincent confronted you last night. The firm representing the claimant is Hargrove and Sloan. Do you know that name?" "No." "They represent Isabel Monroe." Vivian sat up. The bedroom was gray with early light, Vincent's side of the bed empty. He had not come to the room last night, had slept somewhere else in the house, or not slept at all. The absence of him in the bed was both a relief and a data point she filed automatically. "On what basis?" she said. "The claim alleges a prior contractual agreement between Monroe and Vincent Blackwell, predating your marriage, under which Monroe was designated as a financial beneficiary of any Blackwell family asset acquisition during the term of their arrangement." Diana paused. "In plain language, she's claiming that Vincent promised her a cut of money he brought into the family during the period they were involved, which, according to the filing's timeline, began before he married you." The room was very quiet. A car moved past on the road beyond the estate gate. The morning birds were starting somewhere in the garden. "She's not loyal to him," Vivian said. Not a question. The shape of it had been assembling itself in her mind since Diana began speaking, the pieces finding their positions the way pieces do when the picture has been there all along, and you have simply been looking at the wrong section of it. She never was. She's been running her own play. "That's my read," Diana said. "And here's what's significant. This filing came through legitimate channels, which means she has documentation of that arrangement, which means Vincent put something in writing at some point that he is now extremely motivated to suppress." Another pause. "Vivian, we have a window here that did not exist yesterday. If Monroe's documentation shows what I think it shows, it corroborates at least two of the financial structures we've been building a case around. Her records and ours are pointing at the same architecture. Can we use it? Not directly, but I can have a conversation with her attorneys that may make this morning's situation considerably more useful to us than it appears." Diana's voice shifted slightly. Not warmth exactly, but something adjacent to it. "File time is 9 o'clock. I need you out of that house before then. Vincent's attorneys will move to freeze any asset transfer as soon as our filing hits the system, and I don't want you inside those walls when that happens." Vivian was already out of bed. "Lily comes with you. Pack what you can carry in one bag, essentials only. Where is Charlotte?" "I can reach her." "Call her now. I'll have an address for you in 20 minutes. She ended the call and stood in the center of the bedroom floor in the gray morning light. One bag, essentials. She had rehearsed this in her mind a dozen times over the past 2 weeks. The specific logistics of leaving with a 14-month-old child, what you could not forget, what could be replaced, and what could not. She had the go bag ready. She had assembled it over the course of 4 separate days, adding things gradually so that nothing disappeared from the room in a way that registered as preparation. She pulled it from the back of the closet shelf. She checked its contents in under a minute. Then she went to the nursery. Lily was awake, had been awake, probably for a while, conducting her usual pre-breakfast monologue with the stuffed rabbit. She looked up when Vivian came in with the specific, undisguised pleasure of a baby greeting the person it has been waiting for, and Vivian felt the expression on her own face do something involuntary and complicated. "Good morning," she said quietly. "We're going on a trip." She changed Lily, dressed her in layers, tucked the rabbit into the bag alongside a 2-day supply of food and 3 changes of clothes. She worked quickly and without sound. The house around her was still. She did not know where Vincent was, and she did not go looking. She was at the top of the main staircase, bag on one shoulder, Lily on the other hip, when she heard him. He was at the bottom of the stairs. He had come from the direction of the study, Still in the clothes he'd worn the night before, jacket off, sleeves rolled. His hair was uncharacteristically disordered. He looked like a man who had spent the night in conversation with other people. Phone calls, she imagined, a chain of them. His attorney and his financial people and whoever else composed the inner circle of his operation when things began to move against him. He looked up at her. He looked at the bag. "Where are you going?" he said. "I'm leaving, Vincent." "No." Just the one word. Flat and immediate, the way he had said she'll stay the night she overheard him. A logistical statement, not a request. "You're not taking her." "She's my daughter." "She's a Blackwell." He moved to the base of the stairs. "Put the bag down. We can talk about this." "We're done talking." She started down the stairs. She kept her hand on the railing, and Lily pressed to her hip and her eyes on the space between him and the front door. The distance was maybe 20 feet. She calculated it. She had spent years in this house, and she knew the floor plan of it the way she knew Lily's rhythms, by necessity, by repetition, by the specific knowledge of someone who had learned to understand their environment as a system they had to navigate rather than a place they inhabited freely. Vincent moved to the center of the stair base, blocking the direct line to the front door. "Vivian?" His voice had changed. Not softer, but differently dangerous. The way a controlled thing is dangerous when the control is being exerted too visibly. "I know about Diana Mercer. I know about the filing, and I'm telling you that if you walk out that door with my daughter before we have a legal agreement in place, you are making a decision that I will not be able to walk back from." "Then don't walk it back." She was 8 steps from the bottom. "Move, Vincent." "Where's the documentation?" His eyes went to the bag. "Is it in there? The copies? Where are they?" "Somewhere you've already lost access to." He took a step toward the stairs. "I need those documents." "I know you do." 5 steps. She kept moving. Lily, perhaps reading something in the quality of the adults around her, had gone very still against Vivian's hip, one fist gripping the shoulder of Vivian's shirt with an intensity that exceeded her usual grip. "Vivian, stop!" He was at the foot of the stairs now. His hand came up and closed around the newel post. Not blocking her, not yet, but the body language of a man narrowing options. "You think you understand what I can do. You don't." "I know exactly what you can do, Vincent. I've been watching you do it for 2 years. She reached the bottom step. She was 4 feet from him. "Isabel Monroe filed a claim against my inheritance trust this morning. Your attorneys probably called you about it at 6. She watched his face, the jaw, the specific tightening around his eyes that told her she was right. "She's not on your side. She never was. And the documentation she filed is going to make it very difficult for you to keep the financial architecture you've built invisible in a courtroom." She adjusted Lily on her hip. "Move. You don't know what you're talking about." "Hargrove and Sloan," she said the firm's name and watched it register. "They're very good, apparently. Good enough to have paperwork that corroborates mine." She held his gaze. "You built this entire plan around controlling me, controlling the timing, controlling what I knew and when I knew it. And the woman you were using as the alternate plan has been running her own version of this entire time." A pause. "You trusted the wrong people, Vincent. That's what this is." Something shifted in his face. Not collapse. Nothing so clean. More like the specific expression of a man who has just recalculated the damage and found it larger than his first estimate. His hand was still on the newel post. Vivian watched his knuckles. Then Evelyn's voice came from the hallway above. "Vincent, don't." They both looked up. Evelyn stood at the top of the staircase in her dressing gown, looking down at them with an expression that Vivian had never seen on her face before. Something that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it. The expression of a woman who has spent 40 years managing outcomes and is watching one escape management in real time. "Let her go," Evelyn said. Quietly. Not kindly. There was no kindness in it, but with the specific pragmatism of someone prioritizing correctly. Not like this. Vincent looked at his mother. Something passed between them. Not words. The older communication of two people who have operated in concert for decades. The compressed language of shared history and shared stakes. His hand released the newel post. He stepped to the side. Not far. 18 inches. Enough. Vivian moved past him. She kept her pace controlled. Not running, because running was panic, and panic was information she was not going to give him. She walked to the front door, turned the handle, and stepped out into the cold morning air. She did not look back. Charlotte's car was at the end of the drive. Charlotte had parked outside the gate and walked in when Vivian texted her. Understanding without needing it, explained that the car should not be visible from the house. She came forward when she saw Vivian and took the bag without a word, and they moved together down the drive toward the gate. Vivian heard the front door of the house open behind her. "This isn't over," Vincent's voice from the portico carrying clearly in the cold air. "You understand that. Whatever your lawyer thinks she's filed, whatever you think you have, this isn't close to over." Vivian did not stop walking. "Vivian." She passed through the gate. Charlotte had the car unlocked, Lily's travel seat already installed in the back. Charlotte had done this while waiting, thinking ahead the way she always thought ahead, the way she had been thinking ahead since the night she made the call that changed everything. Vivian strapped Lily in, got into the front seat, and closed the door. Charlotte pulled away from the curb. Neither of them spoke for 2 minutes. Then Charlotte said, "You're shaking." "I know." "Lily's okay?" Vivian looked in the rearview mirror. Lily was examining the rabbit with the focused seriousness she brought to all tactile investigations, apparently untroubled. "She's fine." "Where are we going?" Vivian gave her the address Diana had texted, a service apartment in the Eastern District, registered under a name that connected to nothing in the Blackwell network, paid 3 months in advance through Diana's office accounts. Charlotte drove. The city moved past the windows, early morning and ordinary, people walking to their offices with coffee cups, a delivery truck double parked outside a restaurant, 2 children in school uniforms standing at a corner. The ordinary world running its ordinary business, entirely indifferent. They were on the expressway when Vivian's backup phone rang. Diana. "The filing went through at 9:02, Diana said. "We're in the system. His attorneys have already filed a counter-motion to freeze assets, which I expected. We'll argue it in front of a judge on Thursday." A pause. "His team is very good. But Vivian, I spoke with Hargrove and Sloan at 8:30 this morning. And Monroe's documentation is more comprehensive than I initially understood. She has records of financial agreements Vincent entered into going back 7 years. Before your marriage, through your marriage, continuing until approximately 2 months ago." Diana's voice held something Vivian hadn't heard in it before. Something like controlled satisfaction. "She doesn't just have a claim to the inheritance trust. She has records that map the full architecture of his financial structures. Things we have been trying to piece together from fragmentary evidence she apparently has in original signed documentation. Why is she sharing it with you?" "She's not sharing it with me. She's using it to fight her own case. But there will be a point in these proceedings where the court requires full financial disclosure from all parties. And at that point, Monroe's documentation becomes part of the evidentiary record that is accessible to all named parties." A pause. "Including us." Vivian processed this. Outside the car window, the city was giving way to the bridge that crossed the Eastern River, the water below it flat and gray and enormous. So she's been building this case for years, since before she met Vincent, possibly, or she began building it once she understood the scope of what she'd walked into. Diana's voice was measured. "Whatever her motivations, and I suspect they are entirely mercenary, her records and yours together are going to make a very coherent picture for a judge. What about Lily? I'm filing for full temporary custody today on the grounds of the incident last night. Vincent blocking your exit with your child present constitutes a basis for emergency protective measures. It's not ironclad, but it gives us a legal position to hold while the larger case develops." A pause. "And Vivian, I need to ask you something that may be uncomfortable. Is there any chance the estate has surveillance that captured what happened this morning at the staircase?" Vivian thought about the security cameras. Vincent had installed them for perimeter monitoring. She knew the exterior ones, had never thought carefully about whether there were interior ones. She thought about how much she had assumed she understood about the architecture of the life she'd been living. "I don't know," she said. "Find out. Because if there is interior footage of him blocking your exit with a child, it would help us." "It would end the custody question before Thursday," Diana said. Charlotte exited the expressway. The service apartment was 12 minutes away. Vivian sat with the phone against her ear and Lily making quiet sounds in the back seat and the river disappearing behind them. She thought about security cameras. She thought about a man who controlled his environment so completely that he had installed surveillance on his own home without mentioning it to the woman who lived in it, who had monitored the household network without telling her, who had kept a second financial life invisible so close beside their shared one that she had lived inside the fiction of their marriage for 2 years without finding the seam. She thought about what Diana had said. Interior footage, the staircase, his hand on the newel post, the 18 inches he had stepped aside, finally, when Evelyn told him to let her go. And she thought about something else, something that had been sitting in the back of her mind since the moment she walked out the front door. The security system, the panel in the estate's utility corridor, which she had passed every day for 2 years and had never thought about in any practical sense because Vincent's security team managed it. But the access code for that panel was the same 4-digit code Vincent used for everything in the domestic sphere of his life. His gym locker, the wine cellar, the household safe where he kept the family's travel documents. She knew it because she had seen him enter it 100 times, and the brain logs these things without being asked, filing them in case they become useful later. The footage was stored on a local server in the estate, accessible if you had the code and knew where to look, from a remote management application that Vincent's security team used to review it. She had never had cause to access it. She had never wanted to. She did now. "Diana," she said, "if I could get access to the estate's internal security footage remotely, without going back there, could your office receive and preserve it as evidence?" A pause. "Yes, absolutely yes. Can you do that?" "I think so." "Then do it now, before his team thinks to wipe it." She took the phone from her ear and opened the device's browser. She searched the security system's manufacturer name. She had seen it on the panel housing, another thing the brain logs without instruction, and found the remote management portal. She entered the estate's address. She entered the access code. The portal opened. She was looking at a menu of camera feeds: exterior, perimeter, garage. And there, interior. Entry hall, main staircase. Her hands were not shaking anymore. She navigated to the staircase feed and pulled the morning's recording, 6:50 a.m. to 9 a.m., the window that mattered. She found the timestamp she needed and let it play on the small screen. The angle was from the upper corner of the entrance hall, looking down. It captured the staircase in full, the base of it, the front door beyond. She could see herself coming down the stairs, Lily on her hip, the bag on her shoulder. She could see Vincent at the base of the staircase, the hand on the newel post, the body blocking the route to the door. The exchange she could not hear from this angle, but whose content she knew precisely. She could see the moment he stepped aside, and she could see something she had not registered in the moment itself. Before he stepped aside, his free hand had come up and made contact with her shoulder as she moved past him. Not a grab, not a push, but contact. Deliberate, physical, intended to impede. The footage was 42 seconds of material that would make Thursday's custody hearing a significantly shorter proceeding than Vincent's attorneys were currently expecting. She sent the relevant segment to Diana's office through the portal's sharing function. Then she closed the application and put the phone back against her ear. "It's sent," she said. "Staircase camera. This morning. He made physical contact when I was leaving." Diana was quiet for 2 seconds. "Vivian, this is—" She stopped herself, composure reasserting. "This is very good. This changes Thursday considerably." Charlotte pulled into the parking structure beneath the service apartment building. She cut the engine. In the back seat, Lily had fallen asleep against the side of her car seat, the rabbit tucked under her chin. Vivian looked at her daughter in the rearview mirror for a long moment. The small, perfect face, the fist against the cheek. Everything ordinary about a sleeping child. Everything enormous about this particular sleeping child in this particular moment. "Thursday," Vivian said. "What do I need to do before Thursday?" "Stay where you are. Stay off the household network. Don't communicate with Vincent or Evelyn through any channel except through my office." A pause. "And Vivian, I need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that Thursday is not the end of this. It's the beginning of the public phase. Once we're in that courtroom, everything that has been contained inside the walls of that estate becomes part of a record. His organization, his finances, His arrangement with Monroe. All of it. I know. People like Vincent Blackwell, when their private architecture becomes a public record, they have a limited set of responses available to them. Most of those responses are not gentle. I know that too. She got out of the car. She unbuckled Lily without waking her, lifted her out and held her against her chest in the cold, dim air of the parking structure, one hand cupped around the back of her daughter's head. Charlotte was already at the elevator with the bag, holding the door. Vivian walked toward it. Behind her, somewhere across the city, a man who had spent his life controlling rooms and people and outcomes was sitting with his attorney and a security footage notification that told him the recording had been accessed and shared from a remote location in the past 15 minutes. He was understanding in real time that the woman he had spent 2 years managing as a variable in his own plan had, while he was focused on the staircase, already reached past him. The Thursday hearing lasted 4 hours and 19 minutes. Vivian sat at the plaintiff's table in a courtroom on the 6th floor of the Civil Courts building and did not look at Vincent once during the opening statements. She looked at Diana Mercer, who stood and spoke with the precise, unhurried authority of someone who had been preparing for exactly this moment for weeks. She looked at the judge, a woman in her 60s named Harriet Collier, who had the specific quality of attention that comes from decades of listening to people perform their versions of the truth and having learned to locate the actual truth somewhere in the negative space between the performances. She looked at the document spread on the table in front of her, the accumulated weight of everything she had gathered and survived long enough to place into evidence. She did not look at Vincent because she had made a decision, sometime in the 3 days she had spent in the service apartment with Lily and Charlotte and the backup phone and Diana's twice-daily briefings, that she was going to stop measuring herself against his reactions. She had spent 2 years calibrating her behavior to his responses. She was done. His attorney was a man named Grayson Whitfield, senior partner at a firm that had represented the Blackwell family for 20 years. He was good, precise and cold, and very practiced at the particular art of reframing narratives inside the language of legal procedure. He stood and made his opening argument with the smooth confidence of a man who had won a great many rooms through the appearance of reasonableness, and Vivian listened to him describe her as emotionally volatile, financially inexperienced, and motivated by a vindictive desire to damage her husband's reputation, rather than genuine concern for her daughter's welfare. She breathed. She kept her hands flat on the table in front of her. She thought about the staircase footage. Judge Collier reviewed the footage at 11:15 in the morning. The courtroom was very quiet while it played on the screen set up at the front of the room. 42 seconds. The staircase, the blocking, the hand making contact with Vivian's shoulder as she moved past with Lily on her hip. When it ended, the judge looked at Grayson Whitfield over the top of her reading glasses and said, in a voice that contained no particular emotion, "Counselor, I'd like your client's account of what I just watched." Barney, Whitfield did not miss a beat. He described the footage as showing a man attempting to initiate a calm conversation with his wife, with physical contact that was incidental and non-threatening. He used the word incidental 3 times. Vivian watched the judge write something on the notepad in front of her and thought about the specific weight of a well-chosen word dropped into a room full of people who have all just watched the same 42 seconds. The custody motion was decided before lunch. Judge Collier granted Vivian temporary primary custody of Lily with supervised visitation for Vincent, pending the outcome of the full financial proceedings. She delivered the decision in the same measured register she had used throughout the morning. No drama, no editorial, just the clean placement of a legal determination into the record. Vincent's face, at the moment of the ruling, was the only time Vivian looked at him directly. She had permitted herself that. His face held. That was the thing about men like Vincent. The surface held even when what was beneath it was fracturing. But there was something around his eyes, a compression of the muscles there, a specific tightness that she recognized because she had lived inside this face's range of expressions for 2 years and had learned to read the ones he did not intend to show. He had not believed it would go this way. He had believed right up until Judge Collier's voice said the words, that the architecture he had built, the lawyers, the resources, the network of relationships that had protected the Blackwell name for 2 decades, would hold. It had not held. Vivian walked out of the courthouse at 1:17 in the afternoon. The day was cold and bright. the kind of winter clarity that makes everything look very clean and slightly merciless. Diana walked beside her and was speaking about the schedule for the full financial hearing, dates and procedures, and the expected timeline for the asset disclosure process. Vivian listened and understood and filed each piece of information where it needed to go, and she also felt walking down those courthouse steps into the cold light, something she had not felt in a very long time. A quality of air that was simply air, not monitored, not managed, not belonging to the atmospherics of someone else's carefully constructed environment. Charlotte was waiting at the bottom of the steps. She had Lily. Lily, upon seeing Vivian at the top of the courthouse steps, executed the particular full-body lurch of a child who has identified the person she most wants to reach and is prepared to use any means available to close the distance. Vivian came down the steps and took her and held her and breathed into the top of her head. "Okay," Charlotte said, reading Vivian's face the way she had been reading it for years. "Okay." The full financial proceedings took 11 weeks. Vivian did not live through those 11 weeks the way she had lived through the weeks before the first hearing, managed, performing, monitoring the temperature of every room she walked into. She lived through them with the specific functional exhaustion of someone who has come out of a prolonged crisis and discovered that the body does not release its vigilance all at once, but in stages, like a fist unclenching one finger at a time. She woke early each morning in the service apartment that had become, in its stripped-down practicality, more genuinely hers than any room in the Blackwell estate had ever been. She made coffee in the small kitchen. She fed Lily. She answered Diana's calls and reviewed documents and went to meetings and came back and fed Lily again and sat on the floor of the apartment's living room and let her daughter climb over her legs with the determined focus of a mountaineer who has identified a summit and will not be redirected. The financial picture that emerged over those 11 weeks was larger and more complex than anything Vivian had imagined when she began photographing documents in the estate's filing cabinet. Vincent had operated a financial structure involving 14 separate holding entities across 3 jurisdictions, with assets that had been systematically transferred, restructured, and relocated over the course of his marriage to make them legally inaccessible to a divorcing spouse. The structure was, Vivian was told by the forensic accountant Diana's office retained one of the more sophisticated arrangements she had encountered in 20 years of this specific work. It was also, the accountant noted without apparent irony, ultimately unsuccessful, because the documentation that Isabel Monroe had been accumulating for years, with the specific, patient intentionality of a woman who had walked into Vincent Blackwell's world with a clear understanding of what she wanted to walk out of it with, mapped the architecture with a precision that no subsequent restructuring could obscure. Isabel Monroe had never loved Vincent Blackwell. This fact emerged not dramatically, but incrementally, through the procedural process of financial disclosure, in the way that most truths about carefully managed people emerge. Not in a single revelation, but in the accumulated weight of details that resolve over time into a coherent picture. She had met him through deliberate introduction. She had identified the scope of his assets within the first year of their involvement. She had begun documenting the financial structures almost immediately, building a record with the methodical patience of someone playing a very long game. The pregnancy, a boy, as Vivian had suspected, confirmed in the medical records that became part of the disclosure, had been timed, not accidentally. Timed. When Vivian understood the full shape of it, sitting in Diana's office on the 9th week, reading the forensic accountant's summary report, she sat with it for a long moment before she spoke. She used him, Vivian said, the same way he was using me. He was doing to me what she was doing to him. Yes, Diana said. He never saw it. No. A pause. Men who are very good at controlling things tend to have a specific blind spot for people who are doing the same thing back to them. They're looking outward. They're not looking at the person closest to them. Vivian looked at the report in front of her. What happens to her now? Her claim against the inheritance trust will be dismissed. There's no legal basis for a third-party claimant to access assets that were never part of the Blackwell estate. She'll receive whatever her agreement with Vincent specified, which is now subject to the same asset freeze as everything else, and which may amount to considerably less than she anticipated once the settlement is fully adjudicated. Diana's voice held no particular satisfaction in this. just information. She took a significant risk with a very long timeline and came out with less than she planned for. That's the shape of it. And the baby. Paternity is being contested. Vincent's attorneys filed for testing. I expect the result will confirm his paternity, which creates a separate set of legal obligations that his assets will need to address. A pause. That's not your problem, Vivian. The child is not your problem, and Isabel Monroe is not your problem. What's yours is what's yours. Let the rest settle where it settles. It took Vivian a moment to absorb the permission in that. To let the rest settle where it settles. She had spent so many months holding the entire shape of everything. The affair, the plan, Evelyn's involvement, Isabel's long game, the inheritance, the accident she had not yet fully addressed in her own mind. That the idea of setting down any portion of it felt structurally risky, like removing a weight from a scale while the reading was still in progress. She had not thought about the staircase much, or rather she had thought about it in the narrow, practical terms of its evidentiary value. The footage, the contact, the 42 seconds that had shifted the custody hearing. She had not thought about it in the other terms, the terms of what it had meant to lose her footing, to fall, to lie at the bottom of the Blackwell Estate's main staircase with her daughter somewhere above her and hear, as consciousness went thin and strange, a voice that had loved her once, or performed loving her, which she understood now was the closest Vincent had gotten to the actual thing, expressing concern not for her, but for the timeline of a financial transfer. She had not let herself think about those 4 days in the hospital. She let herself think about them now, in Diana's office in the late afternoon of the 9th week, with the forensic accountant's report spread on the table in front of her. The ceiling of the hospital room, the specific quality of light in a room where every surface is designed to be cleanable, the sound of the monitors, her parents sitting in chairs at the edge of her peripheral vision, her mother's hand wrapped around hers with the particular grip of a woman terrified to apply too much pressure, and the other hand, the one that had arrived before she was fully conscious, before she understood what was happening around her or how much time had passed. A man's hand, large, careful, working in slow, deliberate circles against her palm, the way you work warmth back into something that has gone cold. And a voice, low, unhurried, telling her nothing urgent, nothing demanding, just the specific texture of words placed into a room by someone who needed nothing back. She had registered these things before she could open her eyes, or form a thought about them. She had registered them the way you register something that has been true for a long time and that you are simply, finally, in a state stripped bare enough to notice. His name was Nathaniel Hart. She had known this name since she was 23 years old, had known the person attached to it with the specific familiarity of long proximity and then the specific unfamiliarity of long absence. He had been present in her life before Vincent, in the background of it, at its edges, the kind of person whose particular quality you do not fully register until they are no longer available to be taken for granted. When she married Vincent, Nathaniel had done what people do when the person they have feelings for chooses someone else. He had made himself absent, not dramatically, not with any declaration that would have made it about him, just a gradual withdrawal that she had been too deep in the early architecture of her marriage to notice with appropriate attention. He had found out about the hospital through Charlotte. Charlotte, who knew everything and had known Nathaniel peripherally through those same early years, had made a single call. She had not asked Vivian's permission because Vivian had been unconscious and because Charlotte understood that permission was sometimes the wrong framework for urgency. He had come. Vivian had been told this later when she was fully conscious and capable of processing information linearly. He had come the first day and been turned away by the hospital's visitor restrictions. Vincent had named himself as the contact authority, which meant he controlled who came and went. Nathaniel had come back the next day through a service entrance he'd identified with the specific patient resourcefulness of a man who had decided that the obstacle was a logistical problem rather than a final answer. A member of the nursing staff had let him in, a young woman who had been watching the daily dynamic of the room with a clinical eye and had formed her own views about who belonged there. He had come every day. He had held her hand and talked to her about ordinary things. A book he was reading, the condition of the roads and the weather they'd been having. A dog he'd seen in the park outside the hospital that had been wearing a sweater with a pattern he found objectionable. He had brought peppermint in some form, a tin of the hard candies, or a small plant, she was never certain. because he knew she associated peppermint with a particular quality of calm, a thing she had mentioned to him once, years ago, in the kind of conversation you have before you have learned to censor the small, revealing details of yourself. She had not told him she remembered this. She had not seen him since the hospital, since the proceedings had consumed all available space in her days, and she had not had the cognitive room for anything outside the necessary. She had thought about the hand, the voice, the particular kind of presence that asks nothing and offers everything simply by remaining. She thought about it now in Diana's office, and she thought, when this is over, I will figure out how to be a person who has time for that. The settlement was finalized on a Tuesday in early March, in the same courthouse where the first hearing had been held, before the same judge. The terms were these. Vivian received primary custody of Lily with structured co-parenting access for Vincent, contingent on his compliance with the court's monitoring requirements. She received a financial settlement that represented a portion of the adjudicated Blackwell assets, not the full architecture Vincent had built, much of which remained legally complex. But enough. Enough to establish a life that was structurally hers, not borrowed from someone else's estate or contingent on someone else's continued goodwill. Her parents' inheritance transferred to her accounts the following week, under Diana's supervision, with legal protections in place that made any third-party claim on it extraordinarily difficult to pursue. Vincent stood at the defendant's table and signed the documents with the same controlled face he had worn in the courtroom throughout, the surface holding, always the surface holding. Evelyn Blackwell was not present. She had not been present at any of the hearings, had managed her own considerable strategic retreat from the proceedings with the skill of a woman who understood that the best position in a losing situation is the one furthest from the visible line of fire. 3 weeks after the settlement, as part of a separate federal investigation into the financial operations of the Blackwell organization, an investigation that had been initiated 6 months earlier by a task force that had been building a case of its own for reasons entirely independent of Vivian's divorce proceedings, and which had simply been accelerated by the financial disclosure documents that had entered the public court record. Vincent Blackwell was arrested at the building where his organization maintained its operational offices. His assets were placed under federal protection. The criminal proceedings that followed were, Diana told Vivian when she called with the news, likely to take years. Vivian was in the service apartment when Diana called. She was on the floor of the living room where she usually ended up in the evenings, Lily using her legs as a landscape feature in whatever game Lily was currently inventing. She listened to Diana and said very little, and when the call ended, she sat for a while looking at her daughter. She thought about a man in an expensive suit in a private lounge beneath a luxury hotel, his wedding ring catching the light, his hand on another woman's arm. She thought about how that image had felt, standing behind frosted glass with Charlotte's hand on her wrist in the dark. The specific quality of a world coming apart. Not loudly, not with drama, but with the quiet, irrevocable precision of a seam giving way. She thought, I am still here. Not triumphantly, not with any of the clean, satisfying finality that stories are supposed to provide. Just the plain factual weight of it. She was still here, and Lily was here. And the world outside the window was doing its ordinary spring business with complete indifference to everything that had happened. And that indifference was, she found, not cold. It was simply accurate. The world had not broken. She had bent very far and had not broken either. She reached out and smoothed a strand of Lily's hair back from her forehead. Lily looked up at her with the expression she wore when she was deciding whether something warranted full attention or could be noted and filed. She noted it and returned to her game. 2 weeks later, Charlotte called at 9 in the morning and said, without preamble, Nathaniel is in the city. He asked about you. I told him I'd ask if you wanted me to pass on his number. Vivian was at the kitchen counter with her coffee. She looked out the window at the March morning, Tishkom, still cold, but with the quality of light that suggests something is thinking about changing. You can give him mine, she said. He texted that afternoon. The message was brief, 4 sentences. No performance, no carefully constructed approach. He said he was glad she was all right. He said he had heard the legal situation had resolved. He said he knew she probably had a great deal to manage, and he didn't want to add to the weight of it. He said if she ever wanted to have coffee and talk about nothing in particular, his number was there. She read it twice. She thought about the hand, the peppermint, the voice talking about a dog and a sweater. She typed back, next week. You pick the place. He picked a coffee shop in the Eastern District, 3 blocks from the service apartment, a place she had actually walked past twice in the previous month without going in. She arrived 7 minutes early, which was not her habit. She was almost never early to anything, and she did not examine what that meant too closely. She ordered and sat at a table near the window and looked at the street outside and thought about all the versions of herself that had gotten here, the full complicated procession of them, the one who had loved Vincent without reservation, and the one who had stayed silent when she should have spoken, and the one who had learned to photograph documents in secret, and the one who had walked down a staircase with her daughter on her hip and kept walking, past the hand on the newel post and the voice saying this isn't over, kept walking until she was through the door and into the cold air and down the drive and past the gate. Nathaniel arrived 4 minutes after her. He looked like himself. This was the first thing she registered, which was a strange thing to register about someone she hadn't seen in years, but which was nonetheless true. He had the same quality she had always associated with him, a kind of steadiness that was not passivity, not the absence of feeling, but a deliberate relationship with it. A man who had learned to be in a room without needing to control the room. He saw her through the window before he came in, and there was a moment, just a moment, outside the glass, before he schooled it, where something crossed his face that she recognized because she had felt its equivalent when Diana had first told her that he had been coming to the hospital every day. Relief. Just relief. Plain and enormous. The specific relief of something you have been holding carefully for a long time and have not yet been certain you were allowed to set down. He came in. He sat across from her. He ordered coffee without looking at the menu, which meant he had been here before, and she filed that small detail in the category of things that would become stories later, told in the specific shorthand of 2 people who have accumulated enough shared history that the abbreviation makes sense. "You look well," he said. "I look tired," she said. "You look well and tired." A pause. Both can be true. She looked at him across the table. The coffee shop was warm, the light outside still pale with late winter, the street carrying its usual mid-morning traffic of people going places and not particularly thinking about it. Her phone was in her coat pocket. Diana would call around noon with a procedural update she needed to review. She had to pick up Lily at 3. The day had the ordinary shape of a day that belongs to you, that makes its demands in the straightforward way of a life that is, at its current dimensions, actually livable. "I want to say something," she said, "and I don't want you to respond to it. I just want to say it." He nodded. "I know what you did. The hospital. I know what it cost you to figure out how to get in there, and I know you did it every day, and I know you didn't do it to be noticed or to have it mean anything in particular. You just did it because you thought it was the right thing, and I was the right person to do it for." She stopped. She looked at her coffee cup for a moment and then back at him. "I don't know what to do with something like that. I haven't known what to do with it for months. I just wanted you to know that I know." He looked at her for a moment. His hands were around his coffee cup, not moving. He had the expression of someone absorbing something they have been waiting a long time to receive without being certain it was coming. "Okay," he said. "Just that." Outside the window, the city moved. A woman walked past pushing a stroller. 2 men in work jackets crossed at the light. A pigeon landed on the windowsill and examined the street below with the exhausted pragmatism of a creature that has been dealing with this particular street for years and finds it unchanged. Vivian sat across from a man who had loved her quietly, without strategy, without leverage, without the need to own or manage or keep. She was tired in a way that was going to take a long time to fully unwind. She had a daughter who pressed her fist to her cheek in sleep, and a lawyer who was thorough in ways that powerful men found inconvenient, and a best friend who had driven a borrowed car to a gate at dawn without being asked to explain herself. She had a settlement and a set of accounts that belonged to her, and a small apartment that was, for the first time in years, a space without a monitoring system she hadn't known about. She had walked through a fire that someone else had lit, and she had come out of it without a single asset she had not earned. She picked up her coffee cup. Outside, the late winter light was doing something tentative and hopeful on the surface of the street, the angle of it shifting as the morning moved toward noon, the city ordinary and indifferent and entirely, mercifully hers to move through. She was not healed. She would not be for a while. But she was here. She lifted her cup toward Nathaniel, not a toast, Not a gesture that had a name, just the small movement of one person acknowledging another across a table in an ordinary coffee shop on an ordinary morning. And he lifted his back, and they drank.